Good morning and welcome to the Ad Hoc Scrutiny Panel meeting on residential housing stock, health and safety compliance. I wonder if the panel would like to introduce themselves, please. So, Councillor Lee Richards.
Yes, Councillor Sue Lee Richards from Newsom Ward.
Linda.
I'm Linda Summers. I'm a co-optee on the panel.
Councillor Rupal.
Hi, I'm Councillor Harpreet Uppal. I chair the Economies and Neighbourhood Scrutiny Panel and I'm here as an observer. Thanks.
Councillor Smith.
Yeah, Councillor Anthony Smith, Lidley Ward.
And Kevin.
Hi there, Kevin McAllister, and I'm an independent co-optee on the panel.
And I'm Councillor Liz Smage, chair of the panel. And we've apologies this morning from Councillor Amanda Pinnock. Okay, do any councillors have any interests they wish to declare or any members? No? Okay. All debates are in public today and it is being webcast live and the recording will be on the website afterwards. We have no deputations or petitions and we've no public questions. The terms of reference are attached for information. So we'll move for item 7, governance arrangements. Eric, is this yourself? Would you like to introduce yourselves when you speak, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Eric Hughes, Head of Business Assurance and Transformation in the Homes and Neighbourhood Service. More than happy to introduce this report, Chair, on the new governance arrangements, hopefully fairly self-explanatory. If I could draw members' attention to page 9 in the pack, 13 in the PDF pack, depending on which way you look at the numbers, for the structure of the new governance arrangements. As stated in the report, Cabinet remains the overall responsible body as the registered provider. This was the case when there was the arm's length management organisation in place and obviously remains the case today. The Housing Advisory Board has been established as the opportunity for scrutiny of the Homes and Neighbourhood Service performance on a full range of issues, particularly around the consumer standards and regulatory standards from the Regulator for Social Housing. Obviously, building safety matters fall within that, but that's ably supported by the Building Safety Assurance Board, which, as the paper said, are made up of officers across the organisation to provide that level of technical input and scrutiny into the building safety matters around the 6 major compliance areas and to advise the Housing Advisory Board on any particular issues that they feel are pertinent to them. The Building Safety Board also has the opportunity to feed directly into the Health and Safety Oversight Board for the Council. And all of these arrangements are supported by the Tenants Advisory and Grant Panel, which enables the tenant's voice to be heard strongly and loudly across all policy and strategy areas within the service. So that's the new governance arrangements in place. We believe this triangulated governance arrangement with the board, the Building Housing Advisory Board, the Building Safety Assurance Board and the Tenants Advisory and Grants Panel helps us meet our regulatory obligations and delivers a service that our tenants and communities want to see and obviously deserve. With that introduction, Chair, I'd be happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you. Can I open the questions? Oh, good morning, Councillor Scott. I hadn't seen you, sorry. Good morning, Councillor Scott. Can I open the questions actually and ask about visibility of the boards within the council, please? Because and actually to tenants, because there's no visibility that these boards are actually meeting and what their work programme is. And you've got something in the terms of reference for the Housing Advisory Board that, for instance, elected members can attend meetings at the board at the discretion of the chair. Elected members do not have voting rights, but elected members don't know when the meetings are happening and what the work plan is for them. So how do they know A, they can attend, and B, what's happening? So I'm wondering if that is a similar situation for tenants as well. How do they know what is happening? Thank you.
I think if I take the latter part of that question first, if you don't mind, Chair, I think maybe your point is well made. I think our tenants are reasonably well cited on the arrangements here. For example, all of the tenant advisory and grant panel members receive information about the items that are going to the Housing Advisory Board, and indeed present a regular report back to the Housing Advisory Board, and the Housing Advisory Board presents a regular report back to the Tenants Advisory and Grant Panel. So on the tenant side of things, I believe there's some reasonable oversight there. I think
No, sorry, I was meaning the wider tenants, not just the ones on the panels. Sorry.
I do understand. No, absolutely. But I mean, we have more than a dozen of those members involved in those particular panels, but they're also involved in a number of tenants groups across Kirklees. So obviously we are expecting them to take that back to their tenants groups and raise issues with their tenants groups and make sure that liaison is taking place. So that's what I meant by the fact that I think that is taking place. We don't have a website or anything like that at the moment that we can publicise these things on. Our websites are moving into the council's websites. There's a large project to completely revamp the council's website, and we're looking at a new Homes and Neighbourhood Service section of that website. When that's available, we'll have much more visibility about things that we can publish to the public, to our tenants, to the wider public of Kirklees. We haven't had the conversation around publicising the forward plan. I think that's something, obviously, with Councillor Scott here, something we can pick up at the Housing Advisory Board to start doing those kinds of things. But clearly, when those mechanisms are in place, we could start publicising that more widely to the wider public. From the point of view of councillors, I would have to admit that's not something I've had to do previously in the past, publish things to councillors. I'm not sure what the best mechanism would be. I can obviously liaise with Sheila and others in the governance service for how to make that information available to councillors. But there's certainly nothing here around trying to hide things away. We want to be absolutely open and transparent. Obviously, these are relatively new arrangements, and I'm sure we're all finding our feet.
Yeah, this is why I'm asking, because they are new, and from sitting where I'm sitting, I can't see the visibility either locally through to
you haven't got that line of sight.
No, so
Absolutely.
this is why I'm asking. Councillor Uppal.
Thanks, Chair. I was actually just going to ask the same question around sort of role of councillors, really. So I think that's mainly been covered. Can I just ask about, obviously, Cathy is the responsible cabinet holder, will sit on the board and is the chair of the board. But can I ask, is it quite common for boards like this not to have other elected members on it, or is that a choice that we've made locally for a particular reason?
Well, that I think takes us back to a constitutional question within the wider council, because obviously the council under the Local Government Act has elected for cabinet style governance and not committee style governance. I mean, I'm not the constitutional expert here, so don't I think we'd obviously go to Julie Muscroft, etc. But obviously, if you started to bring lots of councillors together on something like a formal board like this, there may be the view that we've actually created a housing committee, which will go against the council's constitutional arrangements. But that's a conversation to be had, obviously, internally about how those kinds of arrangements can be made, which is why my understanding is at the moment that's why councillors can attend and be part of the discussions, but don't have those formal voting rights, even though this is an advisory board. So it's a conversation piece that we can pick up within that wider council constitutional arrangement.
Okay, all right. There are different boards that you could look at within the council that have different partners involved and maybe have different representatives from different groups on board. They don't have all councillors or anything, but I didn't know whether Cathy wanted to come in on this one with it being elected member question.
Yeah, to be fair, I would have to go to Julie Muscroft to find out about councillor involvement. I think it all marries in with your initial question, Councillor Smage, when you said about the visibility of the board and councillors having access to information about what's being discussed and what they can actually contribute if they do come. So I have no objection to councillors being part of a separate kind of thing where we can get the communications out to them, because I think it's crucial But equally, it's about councillors are at the heart of everything we're doing, and we're talking about the safety of our tenants and everything, and who better to be the person going back to the tenants and telling them. So I think they're going to play a crucial element in this.
Yeah, I think so. I think that elected members and tenants together are critical. Yeah. Naz, did you want to come in on this point before I bring Linda in?
It was just really to remind ourselves on the journey that we're on. And when we took the decision, when Cabinet took the decision to bring the activities of the former Almo back into the council, the concern that we had was that we would be losing some of the tenants' voice that we had represented on the former KNH board. And it was as responding also to becoming more white paper compliant in terms of the government's white paper on social housing, where the tenants' voices are at large through that. And we didn't want to lose that. If you recall, in the previous incarnation of this panel, we talked about strengthening the tenants' voice and ensuring that we had that. And that the tenant's voice was influencing cabinet decision making, because the decision maker here still remains the cabinet, not the advisory board. It advises cabinet about those key decisions. And the chair of the board, being a cabinet member, was the conduit for which that voice was then taken into cabinet with. And then what we were keen to do was to ensure that we supported that tenant's voice with independent experts or people from the profession, which is why we have 4 co-optees. And then, of course, the responsible strategic director to influence and advise cabinet decision making. So really, I think your point about how do we achieve visibility for members, we've talked previously at this panel about creating a forward plan of key decisions, both that would go straight to cabinet, but also through officer delegation, so that that visibility in terms of transparency is there. But I do take the point, Councillor Smage, that you made earlier about we could maybe have broader visibility of the forward plan and enable elected members to engage where they feel appropriate. So I think we'll have a look at that and make sure that there's a greater visibility across council structures to enable that to happen.
Okay, thanks. Kathy, did you want to come back on that?
Yeah, obviously with the Housing Advisory Board, they'll be advising a cabinet, but I do see there's a crucial role for pre-scrutiny in this as well, because I think they're going to be the critical friend that will add and contribute as well. So I do see that role playing into this. So I just wanted to mention that, sir.
Okay, thank you. Linda, you want to come in?
Yes, thank you, Chair. It was a slightly different question, although possibly on the same theme, really. It's around the Housing Assurance Board. I obviously don't have involvement in my day job in work of this specific type, but I do have quite a bit of experience in project management and wider programme management. And whenever you see an assurance board, it involves membership from out with the immediate project deliverer, because it implies an element of independent assurance. The word assurance means something beyond just operational management and oversight of the work that's going on. It's assuring that things are being done by somebody who's in a position to challenge robustly, because they sit outside the management lines. And this one doesn't have an independent chair, doesn't have any tenant involvement, doesn't have any independent expert co-optees on it. It just strikes me as the council marking its own homework, really. And I just wonder whether, well, clearly there was a conscious decision made to structure it in that way, but why that was.
Naz, do you want to come in?
Yes, and I think these points have been made at previous panel meetings about the independence of the chair, particularly when I was the chair of the board, and I think the point was very well made. I have stepped down as the chair because I think that marking my own homework element is clearly a conflict. And so we've invited the Director of Climate Change, Environment and Climate Change, I think his director is called, Colin Parr. And so he now chairs the Building Safety Assurance Board. The membership is from out with the service in terms of other people from corporate assets, from corporate health and safety, building control. Those aren't members of staff that sit within the Homes and Neighbourhood Service. The Homes and Neighbourhood Service are officers in attendance, if you will, to report in rather than mark our own homework. So others are marking it from other parts of the council. That doesn't detract from the point about the broader council marking its own homework, but there is that independent degree of challenge from an officer perspective. It is a group of technical experts there to advise the board where that independence and that involvement from tenants and independent experts is already present. So it's not a decision-making body as such. It's a technical advisory group to the Housing Advisory Board.
Linda, did you want to come back? Yeah.
Just briefly, if I may, what one sort of specific example though, where in-house thinking might limit the effectiveness of the assurance board, I thought, was around the risk register. Because I think when we looked at the risk register, there was a suggestion that it perhaps wasn't sophisticated enough to identify relative priority of risks. Because there was, for example, a lot of mitigations had been put in place, but the risk score hadn't actually changed because the method of scoring wasn't sufficiently refined, if that's the word, to allow that to be done. And of course, if everything's high priority, then nothing is really, because you've got to be able to assess the relative priority of the risks. And it just struck me that somebody coming from a different background out with the council might have been able to challenge that, whereas the in-house thinking is, well, this is the risk register structure that the council uses, so this is what we're using. And I'm sure that's true, but the council's never had to manage a project of this complexity and risk before. And therefore, that sort of independent view that says, OK, even if the council has used this risk register for a million years, it's not working for this project, let's find a better way of doing it. That challenge couldn't really be made because people are thinking about the way the council always does things. That might be unfair, but that was my concern, I guess.
I think I can understand that concern, and that's where we've brought in the likes of Anthony Brown, RMS Consulting, etc., to offer that independent challenge. And that's where obviously this isn't every line of defence, this committee or this board. It is ultimately a not quite first line of defence, but it sits probably between first and second line defence if you look at the sort of three lines of defence mechanism. And therefore Anthony Brown, Mazar's reviews, internal audits, etc., all add to that in sort of scrutiny and review of what is taking place. I think it's a point still though well made from the point of view of that group think, if I can use that the expression, because I think that's where I think you're coming from, Linda, and that's where that sort of independent challenge is really important. Whether that independent challenge is best sat as a board member or visiting the board, I think that is something for debate, if I'm perfectly honest. Because again, if you're on the board, you can end up being part of the groupthink that's on the board anyway, even if you're independent, if you're the only person there. And that's where that sort of mix of expertise coming and visiting on occasions and having that sort of helicopter view of things is often very important. But it's a point well made, and I think it's something we need to take back to the board and have that conversation.
Okay, thank you. Kevin, did you want to come in on this particular point?
I suppose it's similar but related. It talked about the assurance framework, and Linda was obviously stressing the point of having some independent scrutiny. You've referenced it there, Eric, but it's just wanting to understand how internal audit sits alongside it. Is that completely independently scoped? Is that reported through to the higher board, and who's responsible for monitoring those actions? Just in terms of that independent scrutiny, I can't see it referenced here, but clearly it is a part of your assurance framework and of the governance arrangements you've got in place.
Absolutely. So, for example, I'm just at the moment working with our own internal audit.
Oh, Eric, we seem to have Eric, we can't hear you at this moment in time, and I don't think Eric can hear me. Eric, we couldn't hear you because there seems to be something wrong with your connection. Right, okay. So we'll come back when Eric can sort that out, Kevin. We'll come back to that. Okay. Councillor Smith.
You're muted currently, I think, Eric, as well.
Thank you, Chair. Do you want to give Eric the opportunity to try and come back, or?
Yeah, are you fixed, Eric? Is well, no, sorry. Is your problem fixed, Eric?
I'll never be fixed, Chair. I'm really sorry. I did not take
Right,
that personally.
okay.
Do not worry.
Okay, my apologies. Just came out
Sorry,
wrong.
I'm not
Okay,
quite sure
Eric,
what you did or did not hear there.
Right, we didn't hear anything. It was just a
You
loud
didn't-
noise. Yeah.
I'm really
Okay.
sorry. I think sometimes my headset goes a bit wonky. Anyway, to come back to what I was saying, I am currently scoping with internal audit an audit on data integrity within the compliance system. This was something following the RMS report was identified as an area that we've had to do a lot of data cleansing and data integrity work. So to make sure that that work has been conducted to the highest possible standard and it's going to work for us going forward, I'm scoping that internal audit. So that isn't being done by anybody on that board. It's with myself and the audit team. Obviously, that audit will take place. It will report back, obviously, to the board, to the Housing Advisory Board, if there's any matters that need to be brought to their attention. But we'll also go into the council's overall audit committee from the point of view of any recommendations that come out of that. So we are very much trying to make sure that there is independent review and scrutiny and audit of the things that this board and the Homes and Neighbourhood Service is conducting. Okay. I'm not sure if that covers what you.
It does. I suppose the current scope that you're talking about there is clearly an important scope, making sure that the performance figures that are reported through are accurate. I was wondering, is there a fixed timetable for review of all areas? I mean, best practice is fixed review of individual areas on a set basis. I was just wondering, is that something that you've do the policies that you've put in place outline the frequency of audit?
Yes, they do, and that's part of why those policies are being rewritten at the moment. And we have a 3-year audit plan with our internal audit, and where necessary, we, as you've seen, will buy in specific expertise such as Mazars or other organisations to undertake technical audits on our behalf. So that's all being scoped out and worked in as part of that overall policy review.
Is that okay, Kevin? Did you want to come back, or is it okay? Yeah. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I think that's teased out a really fundamental and important issue. Can I just ask quickly, Eric, have you got a time frame from when we might get sight of the revised audit plan?
Well, we're revising the audit plan now, ready for the next 3 years, because that starts again for us in April. That'll come along to our assurance board probably early January, etc. But I don't mind starting to share those plans earlier as soon as they're starting to take shape. Maybe a meeting in December, I think, is a possible opportune time for us to do that.
Thank you very much. I've got, given the very important and broad themes that we've just been going over, I've got some what seem to me now more minor issues just relating to the actual report. So if I could just refer you to page 6 of the report, paragraph 1, assurance framework on line 6. I just think there's a word missing there. Framework addresses brought to light. Is that should be issues? I'm assuming, should it?
Yes, I think you.
Yeah. Okay. That's that one. And if I could refer you to page 7 of the report, line 2. Undertaken an extensive exercise consulting with a tenant.
With tenants.
Thank you very much. 3.3 place-based working. Can you just remind me what you mean by patch-based model?
Yes, well, at the moment we have a number of housing officers, not my area of expertise, obviously, because it's housing management, but I believe we have ultimately something in the range of 40 patches that officers work in. So they're designated estates communities. We're currently in a process, and we have decided as a senior management team to adopt the 4-area model that the council is adopting. So we're working up our business plan to focus on those 4 areas, the resources that go into them, but more importantly, that analysis of what housing stock we have in that community, what issues there are in that community, so we can start to deploy our resources more effectively, and that'll be coming to the Housing Advisory Board at their meeting in December.
Thank you very much indeed for that. 3.4 climate change and air quality, passive houses, absolutely brilliant. I don't think it's really all that necessary, but it'd be interesting to know how many passive houses we've got planned and what the timeframes are for them.
I believe there's about 20. The time frame, I would have to go and revert back to colleagues.
Thank you very much. And
could I
finally,
just, Councillor Smith, if I may, just on the passive house, it's a site of 100 homes in total, or 100 plus. We are asking the market in that for up to 20, sorry, a minimum of 20 passive house, but obviously if they can do all the site as passive house, we would go for that if it was affordable. We are currently assessing the tenders that have been returned for the principal designer for that development. So we're a way off from coming out of the ground because we're still at the design and planning phase.
Thank you very much, Naz. That's very useful. On page 18, point 2 refers to the approval of small grants from a social investment fund. Can you give me an indication of what we mean by small grant and what the available fund is?
Again, that's not a pot of money I directly control.
So do we want to, would Michelle be able to answer that when she comes on the line? Yes.
More than likely.
Yes.
She's more likely to.
So yes. So if Michelle will be coming on in a little while for her report. So could we ask that again, Councillor Smith, when Michelle comes on board? Because I think it's more her area, isn't it?
It is indeed.
Yes.
Than mine,
okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, happy to do that. Thank you. And finally, I'm assuming that all the places on the Housing Advisory Board and Advisory and Grants panel have been filled appropriately. Could I just? I believe there are 3 places on the Advisory and Grants panel available to members of the HAB. Have they been taken up, or are they all completely separate?
They haven't been formally taken up because obviously both panels are fairly new at this moment in time. There's been some I'll sort of visiting each other's boards and committees going on at the moment. So Housing Advisory and Grant panel members were at the last tag group to look at their work. So people are doing a little bit of cross-referencing to see what each body does, and then we'll try and formalise arrangements going forward. To come back to your point about all places being filled, there is actually 1 vacant place for a tenant member on the Housing Advisory Board. We originally did recruit to all 6 places, but unfortunately one of those members that was identified had a change in personal circumstances and had to withdraw. So at this moment in time, again, and I think it's a point that was made at this body earlier around the office, the tenure of office for each of the places. We have a 3-year tenure with 2 potential periods. That's up to 6 years. So obviously, as you recruit everybody together, everybody finishes together, and we want to try and avoid that going forward. So we took a conscious decision not to re-recruit to that 1 vacant place at the moment. We'll let the current body bed in. We'll recruit to that place in a year or so's time, and that'll start to produce the stagger that will be required to make sure that we don't lose everybody at once. But as I say, technically we are holding 1 vacant place for a tenant member on the Housing Advisory Board, but all the places are taken.
Thank you, Eric. And does the makeup of that of the tenants represent the areas across Kirklees?
Yes, it does, and I'm really pleased to say from the Housing Advisory Board perspective, when we went out to recruit those members, we did things a bit differently. Yes, we put out the normal tenants newsletters and things on our website, but actually we sent text messages to all tenants with a link saying, here's an opportunity, why don't you look into it? That produced us an excellent response, I believe. We had over 50 applications, whereas in the past we might have had, less than half a dozen. So we had a long listing exercise of more than 15 people, and as I say, interviewed those people and offered 6 places, but actually only 5 have been taken up. And of those people, we have a good mix of male, female, a good mix of ages, right from the 30s to the 50s, and a good diverse ethnic group as well. So I believe we've really had an excellent recruitment exercise through that process. Again, if people want to see members, we're currently producing profiles for those members, and when we have our new website, which I mentioned earlier as part of the council's website, we will be publishing details of people on there, and people will then have public sight of who's actually on the panel.
Yeah, and at the December meeting, we've asked for input from tenants and housing advisory panel members. So it would be interesting for panel members to come along and talk to us about how they feel it's working. I think that would be really good. I'm not sure whether panel members would feel that maybe a panel member could go to their meetings, the tenants advisory panel and the housing advisory board to see for ourselves, and maybe even the assurance board to see for ourselves. What do the panel think that would be a good idea for a member to go to each one to see? Yeah. So we'll Sheila can organise that with yourselves, Eric.
I was going to say, I'll send current dates to Sheila, and then we'll make arrangements for.
We'll organise and we'll ask for the panel members to who can go. Okay, Linda, you wanted a question.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It was just a quick and smaller point, really. Both the Housing Advisory Board and the Tenants Advisory and Grants Panel have the same terms of one of the same terms of reference in relation to overseeing the consumer regulatory standards. And I wonder how that overlap works in practice, and what would happen if they take a different view as to how well the council is meeting its responsibilities under those standards.
Very good point. We obviously don't want to promote conflict if at all possible, but obviously if something did arise, we would want those two bodies to be meeting together to identify what the issue was. And my general approach would be, in these kinds of circumstances, whichever was the most difficult from the point of view of if somebody's saying we are failing a standard and somebody's saying we are meeting a standard, I think you'd turn around and say, well, on the balance of probability, if you feel like you're failing it, that's the line that we should take, and we should put measures in place to make sure that we meet it going forward. So, I think it's important that actually both have oversight of those, because I don't think, particularly with the white paper coming along, the tenant's voice being so strong within those recommendations, I wouldn't want it to be given to one body and not the other, if I could put it that way. Both bodies have tenants on it. We want that richness of perspective and opinion, and therefore if that perspective and opinion brings up some conflicts on occasions, then I think that's probably only a good thing, and I'm sure we'll work our way through those.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think I had that as well, of how a conflict could be, tenants were saying, no, this isn't happening. The boards were saying, yes, but it is happening. It's hearing that voice, isn't it? And ensuring the standards are being met. Yeah.
Absolutely. And if anybody, not an individual body, any of these bodies is feeling that a standard is not being met because they don't have sight of maybe what the other person does or the evidence that's being presented somewhere, we need to make sure that transparency and openness is available to both bodies to come to the same informed opinion.
Yeah, thanks. Councillor Lee Richards.
It's only a very minor question, but I see both of those two panels meet on a bi-monthly basis. Do they meet in the same month or alternate months so that one can feed into the other in a timely manner?
I think I would add, actually, particularly from the point of view of the Tenants Advisory and Grants Panel, although technically it meets at least bi-monthly, it's meeting more often than that at the moment. So that sync is not quite there. They do feed into each other, and I'd say whatever the last meetings or the last meetings of the Tenants Advisory and Grant Panel have said will always feed into the Housing Advisory Board, and the Housing Advisory Board always then feeds into the next available Tenants Advisory and Grants Panel. As was pointed out in the paper, at 6 months, and we're coming up to that 6 months now, we said we would undertake a review of our governance arrangements. And these are the kinds of things we're going to look at from the point of view of how these meetings are going to be scheduled going forward. What's the form of business for those meetings going forward, to make sure that we can get some of those links. I believe the linkages are working really quite well for such a new set of arrangements, but obviously we want to make sure that they're feeding into each other as slickly as possible going forward. So that's why we're going to undertake this review.
Thank you.
Okay. Are there any other questions for Eric on this paper? No. Councillor Lee Richards? All right. Okay. Thank you.
I was going to say Michelle and Graham have joined us, so if
Yeah,
you want to pick
yeah.
up that other question from
Yeah.
earlier.
Yes. I'll just summarize there what I think the points we made. So we were talking about visibility of work plans and what is being discussed both for elected members and tenants. We talked about risk register and independent views, and independent challenge, and not doing something just because that is the way the council does it, an independent scrutiny on there. We talked about internal audit and the review of internal audit plans and visibility to us of those audit plans. And we talked about conflict resolution if one board says that there's non-compliance with the standard but others do, and how that the non-compliance is the prominent. Okay, those were the notes I think that I got from that. So can we bring in item 8 then? Michelle and Graham, which one is leading on this? We have a question for from Councillor Smith when we get to questions. So Councillor Smith, you can have the first question. All right, don't let me forget. Okay. But if you can introduce yourselves when you speak, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Smage. I'll start, but I'm going to hand over to Graham to cover most of this paper. So I'm Michelle Anderson-Daw, I'm Head of Partnerships, and then my colleague Graham can introduce himself at the point when he starts. So this paper is really just to give you a bit more information about the approaches that we're taking to communicate and engage with tenants and leaseholders, specifically on fire safety, but the proposals and methodology do lend themselves to other areas to compliance. But for today, we're focusing around fire safety. We are also focusing on tenants living in initially our high risk residential buildings, which, just to remind everybody, are the 4 high-rise blocks, the 12 6-storey blocks, and the retirement living schemes. So the information that's in this report describes key elements of our fire safety engagement framework, which sits within the fire safety management plan, and both are currently being updated and will be shared with this panel in a time scale to be agreed by yourselves. We've also incorporated findings from the Building Safety Engagement Best Practice Report. That's not law, but there are clear recommendations about the approach to engaging and communicating, and that will feature in the updates and is reflected where we can in this piece of work. And you've actually got a link to that piece of work and the final report for information. We have had in place for 3 years our Get Involved tenant involvement strategy. That is still a key document and underpins all our approach. And again, we've highlighted at 3.3 where that sits. We now have the fire safety engagement team in place, and they lead on a lot of that work. initially. So what I'm going to hand over now to is Graham to take you through the different types of communications and methods of an engagement. These are applied uniquely to each project, and going forward, in line with the Building Safety Act, when it becomes law, we will have to have an individual fire safety management plan for each building in scope, and we will apply these principles as appropriate to each building going forward. So I'm just going to hand over to Graham now, if that's okay with you, Councillor Smage.
Thank you, Michelle. Good morning, everybody. I think am I a bit fuzzy? I can just bear with me.
We can hear you. There is a little bit of interference, but we can hear you. It's okay.
Do it that way. Is that okay?
No, we can't hear you now.
Is that
okay?
Is that
That's
better?
fine. That's fine, Graham.
I just
Thank you.
plugged my headset back in.
Yeah.
So sorry, everybody. I'm Graham Sykes. I'm a general manager in the partnership service. So I directly manage the fire safety resident engagement team. So I'm just going to go through a bit of a summary of the report that we've provided you with this morning. I think it's just, before I start, it's important just to give you some context around how our approach, and we really understand that the tone of the messages is really critical for residents, and it would be quite easily to become instructive to say you need to do this because of a fire safety concern, but we're trying to do it in a friendly, restorative approach where we're taking people on the journey with us, with messages around we're doing this in order to keep you, not just you safe, but your family and other residents in the block, and we're really keen to work with you as a landlord to get this right. And you can see that through all our communications. So we'll start with the written comms and letters. So the approach at the moment is that generally we start with a letter to notify tenants and leaseholders what is happening. We don't tend to send a lot of things through the post, and where there's opportunities to go out and door knock and post things, we will do, because we really value that face-to-face engagement, in order that we know that the tenant has received the information, and it gives us the opportunity to speak about what that information's about. The second point there under letters is around the information that we gave following the presence of flammable materials in high-rise buildings around a year ago. We followed that up, and through our other comms, we keep going back to that and saying this is why we are doing this compliance work in this block, to make sure there's that really nice pathway through our comms. Newsletters, the high-rise blocks, so those are the blocks at Berry Brow, Buxton House and Harold Wilson Court, get a bi-monthly newsletter, primarily to talk about fire safety and compliance work in blocks, but we also include other key messages that are appropriate at that time. So if we're doing a campaign with West Yorkshire Fire and Rescue Service, we'll include it there. Other general housing management things that are happening around the block at the time of publication, and also other opportunities for tenants to get involved, whether that's in tenant engagement or it's around employment support and some of those other offers that we have. There are also opportunity to deal with specific concerns. So at the blocks in Berry Brow, a few months ago, 4 or 5 months ago, we had issues with people tampering with the smoke detectors, which was causing faults on the fire detection board. So we took a bit of a two-pronged approach to that. We're talking to that individual, but also letting the whole block know what was going on. Tenants are walking past that board every day, and they can see that it's flashing and there's a fault there. So it was important to share that information and what we were doing as a response, and how we needed those tenants in the block to help us to resolve that issue. Surveys, we have some performance indicators around engagement around fire safety. So we have an ongoing survey that we review every quarter. The information that we get back from that is generally positive, and the questions around understanding of fire safety obligations, both from a tenant's point of view and from our point of view. So we collect that as we go, and we've done something specifically around leaseholders. Notice boards and signage. We've carried out an audit across all our blocks, and we are in the process of replacing all notice boards to display fire safety information and signage that includes evacuation point and fire action notices to ensure that there's consistency and those messages are accurate across all boards, all blocks. Social media, I know that the website's just been mentioned under XP, so I will not dwell on that, but our social media and Facebook, Twitter and text, etc., is something that we're keen to keep refining and growing, and ensuring that it's fit for purpose, and it's getting the hits that it needs, that it's been directed to the right places. Face to face, I know that this panel received an update on the 26th of October in terms of fire safety champions. Recruitment continues. At the time of writing this report, we had 3 fire safety champions signed up. The next phase for us there is to do more face-to-face engagement, door knocking, pop-ups, to explain the role of the champions and to recruit more. We're finding that the campaigns that we've carried out through the newsletters and through the direct letter leaflet drops haven't resulted in many people getting back in touch and saying that they would like to take up that role. I've mentioned campaigns already and doing that jointly with West Yorkshire Fire and Rescue Service, but there is a key some key dates in our diaries coming up next year, around March 22, where it's Fire Prevention Week, and we'll do some work jointly with West Yorkshire Fire and Rescue at that point in time. Walkabouts, very much linked to that, was saying about the distribution of letters, that the fire safety engagement team have a real presence across the 4 blocks, and we're looking to expand that as we move into the 6-storey and retirement living schemes. With the videos, we've pretty much completed the compliance video on gas safety, which demonstrates the importance of the gas safety visit, what we do at the gas safety visit, and how tenants can support that. We are now working on scripts and animations for the other 5 areas of compliance. And as already been mentioned in the meeting, we're very keen to bring tenants on the journey with us, and at the December meeting you will hear firsthand about the tenants' experience of coming with us on the journey. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Smith, I promised you the first question because you had a question from last time, didn't you? Yeah, last report. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll ask that one first. I've got another couple of questions, if that's okay after that. Thank you. So my initial question was around the small grants, which are at the discretion of the Tenants Advisory Grants Panel. Just to get an idea of what the size of the fund was, what the size of the grants were, and what you expect them to be used for.
So the grants relate directly to our social investment fund. So the grant pot itself's £38,000. Traditionally, it was only open to tenant resident associations, and it was for grants for projects that meet with the council priorities. During the pandemic, applications really dried up, Councillor Smith, so we've opened that up to other community groups. In terms of this agenda, linking it to fire safety, we've widened the type of grant applications that will see to incorporate fire safety or anything related to safety. So I think in our heads, and it hasn't happened yet, if the TRA at Berry Brow, the court's TRA, came to us and said, right, we want to really work with you on the fire safety. We've come up with an idea how we can get people really involved, and that might be, I don't know, a fun day or a way that tenants can get together to talk about fire safety. We'd look at funding that through the grants model. So it's open for groups to say, look, I want to do something separate from what you're doing on fire safety. Obviously, it needs to be aligned, but they can apply for funding to make that actually happen.
Okay, so following on from that, thank you very much. How are we planning to make people aware that there are these opportunities?
So predominantly my tenant involvement team have the conduit between the tenant and resident associations and the council. So those groups will be made aware of these opportunities. We have a number of TRAs, and I'm saying a number, it's not a huge amount, that operate around the high-rise blocks, the 6-storey blocks, and the retirement living schemes. Fire safety champions could also access this funding as well, so I'd see it coming from there.
Thank you very much, Graham. And on a similar theme, fire safety champions, could you just try and explain to me what you think some of the barriers are towards recruitment in terms of messaging or perception, and how we're trying to address that? Because I can think of a few. You know, if I was being asked to do that, maybe it's a responsibility issue. Maybe there's a perception that people think they're being asked to do the work the council should be doing. So I just want an idea of what you've thought about and what you've come up with.
Yeah, I think my gut feelings are similar to yours, Councillor Smith, and it could be seen as quite a scary role to take on. We've tried to make our comms that invite to be a champion as friendly as possible, as least formal as we can, but there's still that formality associated with it. And I think where we have been able to recruit, and it's really small numbers, I think we're up to 4 as we speak. It's that face to face. And it's usually on the back of another issue. We're talking. This is the opportunity to become fire safety champion. I know it's clear that you want to do something really good in the block. You care about where you live. This is the perfect role for you. And I think that's how we will break down the barriers. And it's conversations with people, and that's not unsurmountable because we're only talking about a small number of blocks within our wider stock, aren't we? But it's getting out there and having conversations, and it links nicely into what we've just discussed around TRAs and the street voices and the champions, and the champions knowing other people that want to do something in those blocks.
And do you think that do you see a role for the existing people have taken up the fire safety roles in maybe going out and talking to the TRAs, or being included in your messaging?
That's the next phase. That's what we've got planned. It was always an unknown to us. It could be that everybody was knocking down our door to become a champion, and that would have been absolutely fantastic. We've realised that that's not the case, so we need to roll our sleeves up now and get out there and speak to our contacts.
Thank you, Graham. Chair, if you may, I've just got one very minor question now.
Okay, because I've got a queue now.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, and that's just a clarification on page 23 of the report of the term building safety gateways. Can you just clarify that for me?
I think this is this back to Eric? Is this on the Building Safety Assurance Board compliance?
Oh, are we on the? Am I on the wrong section again, Chair? I'm sorry.
I don't know. I don't know. Can you just give me the page number again?
Yeah, it's page 23, and it's terms of reference, and it's bullet point 4. in accordance with the agreed building safety gateways.
Yes, I think it's Eric or Naz. Yeah. Naz, you're on mute.
It's actually more Assad, if I may, Chair.
Oh, right. Sorry. My apologies, Assad. It's yourself.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Naz. So we're making reference to MHCLG's guidance notes, in particular the building safety gateways for new build, in particular. So it's those new arrangements that have been brought into place, Councillor Smith, in order to ensure that all new buildings that fall into scope follow those prescribed gateways for building control and planning.
Thank you very much. I'll let somebody else speak, Chair. I'm sorry.
No, you're all right. No. Every question is essential and very worthwhile. Councillor Richards, Lee Richards.
I think Kevin was before me.
No, you're okay.
Oh, okay.
I consulted the list.
Okay, just a quick question on safety, something that was reported in the Examiner in one of the high-rise about people putting too much waste down the bin chutes, creating a fire hazard. How would that be dealt with, please, Graham?
From a tenant comms point of view, that's been identified and was a subject in one of the earlier issues of the newsletter that I think is attached to this report. In terms of our response, obviously the bin chutes are checked on a really regular basis. The caretakers are down there every day, and that we carry out an annual clean of bin chutes, which is more to deal with the grime and smell associated with bin chutes.
Right, and have your fire safety champions been able to help with comms on that level?
To be fair, we're in such early days with the champions that they're just about to be trained.
Right.
So they're going to get some really basic fire safety training through the engagement team and colleagues in compliance. But we see the champions as being a critical role in putting together those newsletters. They're as well as obviously the housing officers being on the ground, they are another pair of eyes and ears for us. So if they're picking up issues that we can address through the newsletters, their views and suggestions will be taken on board.
Okay, thank you. I've got one other quick question. It's more based at NAS, I think. How are we doing for housing officers in the 4 high-rise blocks? Are they all got a full complement?
We always try and work to full complements. We always have vacancies or sickness absence, and so we do try and manage that. So I think at the Berry Brow flats at the moment, Councillor Suley Richards, we do have somebody off sick, but we have now put arrangements in place to cover that sickness.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Actually, your questions actually brings me to a point I wanted to make before I bring Kevin in. Your paper talks about key letters sent to ward councillors, but it doesn't talk about newsletters being sent to ward councillors. And I'm just wanting to ask that if you're sending communications to tenants such as newsletters, etc., that ward councillors are also given that information so they can follow through on it as well.
I totally agree, Councillor Smage, and I know for the last editions of the Berry Brow newsletter, the publication was sent to the news and ward councillors, but we're adopting that approach from now on. It was an oversight by us.
That's good, thank you. Kevin.
Thank you, Chair. The first question was going to be on training for both staff and for the fire safety champions. You have touched on that, Graham. You able to expand on it in terms of like the level of training and competence that your team have, and also the fire safety champions?
The housing officers and resident engagement team have received training from an overview from colleagues in the compliance team, so they're able to carry out a block inspection, and so they're trained to the same level as the neighbourhood housing officers. So they're going to the block, they know what to look out for. They know the report and referral routes. The champions role, and I don't have the information to hand. I'm quite happy to supply it as part of the minutes of this and just give you more of a detailed explanation of what the champions will be trained on. It's going to be relatively similar to the housing officers, just to give them that both that information in terms of what we're doing in the block and what we'd like them to look out for whilst they're going about their day-to-day businesses as tenants in those blocks.
Okay, and the second, I suppose my observation, it's worth passing. It appears proactive. It's obviously a very sensitive subject, using a range of methods of communicating to people. How about when it don't work? You know, from experience, this will be effective in 99.5% of cases. Do you have a formal timescale and approach for enforcement? And that might obviously cross into Michelle's to answer that.
I think for us, the approach is that restorative. And we've had some major successes with that in the blocks where we have been at a point where we are taking enforcement action through the housing management teams, and we've been able to step in and have a slightly different conversation, and we've resolved things. But there is also that there are going to be cases where enforcement's going to be the way forward. I don't think, from my knowledge, that we've been there yet, and I might be wrong.
Yeah, Kevin, I would just agree. I would agree with Graham. Enforcement is always going to be the last option, because we want to try and bring the tenants with us and leaseholders on this journey. They have to live there. And so we haven't yet reached that stage, but we have always got housing management services running alongside what we're doing. And if we do need to take enforcement, so for example, if there was somebody creating ongoing issues, round bin shoots or arson, worse, or low-level arson, we would take action. We absolutely would take action. But what we're trying to do is build a relationship with the tenants and leaseholders so that they want to and understand what we're doing and want and accept and understand their part working with us.
I completely and wholeheartedly agree with that. I suppose perhaps it crosses into as had with the 22,000 fire actions that are due to be delivered. Then I'm amazed if we're not having to undertake any enforcement action anywhere along the line there in order to with the volume of actions. My experience of delivering compliance programs, is there in any event of that a formal timescale, formal. Do you have a consistent enforcement process, that's similar with gas, that you're applying to fire safety when you're finding it difficult to get access to undertake these works? And are there any in legal action in that legal process at the moment?
So I'll respond to that then. So Kevin, yeah, it's a really good point, and it's something that we're going to come up more and more against. We don't currently use the Environmental Protection Act, which is the kind of statutory instrument that we'll use for the gas safety programme. We are trialling it on the electrical testing programme, though, so that's the next step. So we have got 560 properties where we don't have a 10-year test certificate. So we're now trialling the EPA process to try and use that as the method of injunction against those properties. There is no precedence. We have got authorities and RPs up and down the country that have used that successfully, but it's down to the discretion of the judge and the recognition of risk. We're not at the stage yet where we have issues in terms of carrying out fire safety works to high-rise blocks. We've only got 4 leaseholders, luckily, across those 4 high-rise blocks, but I'm very conscious we have 1,070 leaseholders in our low-rise blocks. That's where I think we're going to get the real challenge, because if we're saying, actually, we're going to fit this door, which is a relatively simple, basic-looking door compared to what the leaseholder may have installed, that's where we're going to get the real challenge, even though we're paying for that door. We've had lots of conversations about enforcement and injunction to try and gain access. There are no instruments within the leases that we have. We don't have the option to rewrite the leases because of the tribunal implications and the like. So we are looking to maybe use the EPA process but we've got to demonstrate beyond reasonable doubt there's a risk there, and in some cases we can't do that because we haven't crossed the threshold to understand what that risk is, and particularly where the properties have been sublet. But we're engaging with landlords where the properties have been sublet. We've got an active programme of asking for evidence of gas servicing and electrical testing. We'll supplement that with our approach in terms of carrying out an inspection relating to fire safety for those properties as well. Right now, we don't have any statutory powers, though. I think that's the point I'm trying to make. But we are testing those through our electrical testing programme.
So you're trialling injunctions as part of that on the electrical testing programme?
Yes. Because we see it as a similar risk, albeit it's not as apparent and the impact is not as great as the gas safety risk. But we're trying to use that as a precedence to then say, well, actually, if we can apply it on the electrical testing programme, we need to apply it on the fire safety programme, both for inspection and remediation works. But again, it's that point about convincing the magistrate that there's a risk there. And unfortunately, the only way we can do that is by saying, well, actually, there's a record of incidents here, because that's what proved successful in the gas industry, isn't it? The gas safety industry, that there were a number of fatalities and unfortunate incidents. We don't have that situation across our housing stock for fire safety, and God forbid that will happen. But we are trying to use the basis of our understanding of risk, our assessment of risk, potential risk, to say, actually, we need enforcement in some cases.
Okay, thank you for that. That's it's helpful to know they could go hand in hand, because unfortunately, it's something which wasn't necessary, but it absolutely is. And I'll use the example you gave in respect to the 560 on electrical safety. Have you got absolute visibility on where they are in the process, when they were last contacted, when the last action was made on that? Because it just sounds at present you're in sort of a trial period, a little bit perhaps I might say a little bit cautious about pushing that because of fear of reputational risk. Have you got that visibility on where they are when they were last contacted? Because obviously these tenants could be posing a risk, not just to themselves, but if it's electrical safety, it could be a risk to the block as well.
Yeah, I mean, I would add as well, Kevin, that in every case in the 563 properties, they're within the 10-year electrical testing regime. So we're trying to move them across to the 5-year testing regime. But in every case, we've got an up-to-date actual record of when we last contacted them, because we need to use that as preparatory evidence for trying to gain access, or to convince the magistrate. Actually, we've made all reasonable attempts to try and gain access. So all those records are right up to date. We maintain them at all times.
Thank you.
Okay, Naz, did you want to come in on this point?
I did, if I may, Chair, and it's a very quick point. And the only thing that we're mindful of with the injunction route is that should the tenant then fail to comply with the injunction, there's a potential for a criminal record for that tenant, and we then need to look at the balance between putting something on somebody's record versus how we progress with the injunction. And it's a limited experience of the courts across the sector, but where an injunction hasn't been complied with, I think the courts are reluctant to then do anything further and push it down the civil route. But that's probably going to be a minority of tenants that will fail to comply with an injunction. I think the injunction will motivate enough people to allow access.
That's absolutely my experience of it, and having it as a tool that your officers can work towards at that time scale gives them a confidence, and it can result in less of them, these cases dragging out if that's that clear access procedure. You're using that as a tool.
Okay, thank you. Linda?
Thank you, Chair. Just a brief question, if I may, which links slightly back to our previous item. This paper refers to things like the engagement framework and the tenant involvement strategy, sort of the overarching structure for it all, really. And I just wondered which part of the governance structure oversees these engagement frameworks and involvement strategies.
Who wants to come back on that one? No,
well, I think Eric was outlining those earlier, wasn't he, in terms of the relationship between the TAG, the Building Safety Assurance Board, and the Housing Advisory Board feeding into Cabinet, where there is that degree of triangulation, and then the principal governance arrangement in terms of scrutinising the effectiveness and the successes of.
I think Linda's question is in relation to these communications. Which board has this in their work plan.
Yeah. Who's looking to see whether the engagement framework is effective?
Eric? I think Michelle will want to come in, and Graham, I'm sure, but TAG are the principal body that looks at the engagement framework directly with tenants. They're certainly the ones that are looking at and reviewing, for example, the standard of communications going out to tenants, working effectively as an editorial panel for a number of those communications. But it is the responsibility of all of us, because again, as we're moving towards a new housing management system, which has lots of form letters within the system, etc., we're reviewing all of those letters. And in fact, we're also not just working with tenants, we're also working with the restorative practice team in the council to review the tone and approach of all of those letters. So that's taking us slightly off the engagement point you were raising, Linda, but primarily, obviously, I believe it's TAG. TAG then feeds into the Housing Advisory Board. The Housing Advisory Board has that more strategic oversight as to communications and how we engage with tenants across the piece. And then we have that sort of relationship back to TAG. So obviously with the communications around how those relationships should be taken forward, or any issues or conflicts, to use your conversation before, as to if those communications are being effective or not.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Ruppel?
It's been asked, Councillor Smidge, so I'm okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask about accessibility of information, please? Because the newsletter, how does somebody access the newsletter and other communications if they have accessibility issues, such as, you know, poor sight or another language, or etc. So how do they actually access this information?
We haven't been asked to provide any of our comms today in a different format. From my point of view, I'd suggest that it would speak to the individual, and from an accessible point of view, we could put it in a format that suits that specific individual. We are doing some work to better understand the demographics of tenants in our blocks, and if we're finding that we're getting higher populations of people from with a specific language, we could look at translation, etc. But from what we've sent out so far, we haven't been contacted to say that people are struggling. That's not to say people aren't struggling, but it comes back to what we're saying in terms of conversations.
Yeah, it's just, how do they know that they need the information if they don't know what the information is saying? Michelle?
I can deal with that. I mean, it's a standard approach that we follow with all consultation. No longer do we, and the tenants will tell us and identify if they need it in any way. We do have the mechanisms to translate, whether it be Braille, whether it be larger print, whether it be another language, on requests. But on the guidance of the council's corporate comms, we wouldn't just do that automatically, because it often doesn't work. So we will follow that process for any consultation or any information or any newsletter.
Yeah, I think I was looking to see what you were doing, just not just sending it, but actually finding out.
Yeah.
That's
and we wouldn't
what
just send
I was
anything.
wanting to know, because that goes to my next question then on resourcing this communications, because at the minute you have a set number of high-rise blocks that you're providing communications to. As this programme of work rolls out to other properties, so for instance, we've talked about retirement living schemes, etc. So as work rolls out to other properties, how is all of this going to be resourced? Because you're going to have a continuing information flow for tenants who have been decanted when the the blocks that are going to be demolished are demolished, etc. You're going to have a communication flow for your fire safety champions that you've got in blocks that remain but have been changed. You're going to have a continual communication flow for new buildings and homes that are coming into the scheme over a long period of time. So how are you going to resource this? What are you looking to do going forward in order to put capacity there to do all this work?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start. I don't know if Naz wants to come in. Well, we'll always have the existing resources, which are our fire safety engagement team, our housing officers, our independent living officers, who will always be involved in any communication and engagement. We have got an additional resource plan in relation to the high-rise regeneration programme, which adds in capacity, which includes tenant liaison to support decanting. All those elements will continue to work together. Obviously, they won't all be working at the same time because these are long-term programs, but we have got an additional resource ask, and that's been approved at the high-rise programme board around comms, including comms resources, additional housing officers, additional general manager, tenant liaison to support the longer-term regeneration programme.
Okay, Eric, do you want to come in?
Yes, just to actually add a little bit to the conversation earlier, Chair, around preferred methods of communication, etc., and how we get that out there. I think members hopefully will be aware we're changing our housing management system. We're moving to a new product, and we're very keen to make sure that the preferred methods of communication are logged within the new system, so we know if there are particular needs for people going forward. You mentioned different languages, Braille, etc. And again, with the website developments, we've been working very closely with council colleagues in the accessibility team to make sure everything that goes on the website is able to be used with screen readers for accessibility, can be translated through Google Translate, etc. I know that throws up lots of anomalies, particularly with technical documents, but at least it is a starter for 10 for many customers to get more accessibility and more visibility of the communications we're putting out than we have at the moment. So I just thought it'd be worth adding that point.
Yeah, I think the information that you are sharing with tenants and leaseholders is so important that it is more important than ever that the communications are in a format that people can access. Assad, did you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It was just on just to kind of supplement what Michelle said, just to let the panel make the panel aware, we are recruiting building safety managers as well. So they're seen as a critical liaison between residents, the organisation, because they have to maintain the building safety case, and within that building safety case there will be a requirement to provide evidence, and within that evidence there will be a communications plan. So we start the journey this week. We start to recruit, Michelle and myself, so we expect those building safety managers to be critical in that line of communication.
Okay.
Chair, if I might just add, whilst it's one thing to make the budget available, another thing to get the advert out, and
yes, I appreciate that.
There are a couple more hurdles of getting the demand in a market where there's lots of pressure, and then enticing that person to come to work for Kirklees. And we have experienced challenges in recruitment.
Okay, all right. So if we could just summarise then, if there's no more questions. So we talked about enforcement and having a clear pathway for looking at enforcement as part of the tools and timescales, clear timescales, fire safety champions and going out talking to TRAs, communications being sent to tenants and ward councillors, resources, and we also talked about the engagement framework and the governance of that engagement framework. Okay. All right, so can we move then on to item 9, which is the compliance review and regulatory actions, please? Is it Assad that this is?
Yes, Chair, that's me. Thank you. So in terms of the report, this report that's in the pack, this follows on from the report that was provided to the panel on the 21st September and provides an update against all compliance actions upon request from the panel. We had focused in on purely the compliance review actions, but the panel requested that we report on all regulator actions and Mazars actions in one place. So this report captures that. So in terms of summary then, the report updates on progress, as I said, against all actions, those being the independent review by RMS in May 21, those Mazars actions that were from historical audits, and the FRA programme that's ongoing to the high-rise blocks that we notified to the regulator in February 2021. So in terms of how we got to where we did, in terms of combining all those actions, the report from Anthony Brown picked up 48 recommendations, but as we started to develop the improvement plan, as is always the case, we identified further dependencies and further actions. So the number of original actions that were the original recommendations that were 48 grew because we had sub actions and dependencies and further actions relating to those recommendations. So we effectively started to add more and more actions, and you can see from the report at 2.0.3 that it grew from 48 recommendations to 91 in total, because that included all of the kind of sub-dependencies, sub-actions, and so we started to distort where we were in terms of being able to report against the original compliance review. So in August, the Building Safety Assurance Board requested that we go back to the original review and just report on that. So we split away all these other actions. Although we continue to report on those other actions, they weren't contained within the compliance review template that we brought previously. But we're still reporting on them elsewhere. So we still report on the Mazars actions within the compliance review, but we also report on the regulator actions on a weekly basis. So in terms of the compliance review itself, the original review, we've made 51% progress and completion against those original 48 recommendations. And I review that on a weekly basis along with our consultant Anthony Brown and the compliance manager. And we have a continued focus, therefore, on completion of those recommendations in progress. At the time of writing the report, there was one recommendation that was currently at risk because it relied on a dependency to do some software upgrades, which are currently underway and due to complete in January 2020. However, in the meantime, we're not waiting for that upgrade to happen. We've carried out some manual reconciliation of address lists to ensure that our asset list is accurate. We've also identified that there were 126 assets that weren't assigned into any particular program or weren't identified as part of the compliance program. We visited every single asset during September, and we assigned 70 of those as communal assets that weren't previously identified as communal assets. There are 4 remaining assets that we just need to double check. They're in the process of being converted into housing, after which point they'll be added to the compliance register. So I think what I'm trying to just get across to the panel is that we've carried out a manual reconciliation of all the kind of communal assets to be absolutely sure that our compliance program includes all of those assets that we need to visit, and they're clearly identified within our asset lists. There's work ongoing in the background in terms of software upgrades, which allows us to do that on a more automated process. But in the meantime, we've done a manual reconciliation. We can't currently link our asset registers in universal housing to the asbestos register. But again, we've established a manual monthly report to update the stock counts through IT colleagues, which gives us the assurance that any changes to the housing stock are identified through that manual update, and then we can make the adjustments in our compliance registers. If we buy a property and it's got a communal area, if we dispose of a property and it's got a communal area, if we build a property or demolish it, those adjustments are done accordingly to the updates that our IT colleagues provide. All the lead officers attended a workshop in terms of where we are against the compliance review on the 11th of October. The purpose of that was to just kind of take a step back, because we're very conscious since the implementation of the improvement plan, we've been very focused on the completion of recommendations. So we've been meeting on a fortnightly basis just to discuss where the recommendations are, which recommendations are at risk, and how we progress those recommendations. So we felt it was very useful to have an away day, if you like, and for all those lead officers to kind of reflect on the way that we've been dealing with the recommendations and how we've been progressing those. The workshop was very useful, as I say, because it allowed us time to understand the benefits that have been derived from the improvement plan, allowed us to understand the learning from those improvements. But it also identified 11 recommendations that could be completed within 3 or 4 weeks. 7 of those at the time of the writing the report were complete, and 4 are due to be complete by the 15th of November. The session was pretty well received by everybody who attended, so we've got another session in December, early December, and the reason for that is that we want to keep the momentum up, we want to keep progress and the momentum up, and keep everybody's enthusiasm in terms of completing those recommendations, and to get us to a point where we've got a completed improvement plan. In terms of the FRA actions then, so we notified the regulator in February that we had a number of outstanding actions to our high-rise blocks. So progress against those actions is detailed in 2.0.5. We maintain a weekly update. Although we've split them out from the compliance review, we maintain a weekly update, and we publish that update throughout the organisation every week to ensure that we're fully citing colleagues in terms of progress, and we also include those updates to the Building Safety Assurance Board on a monthly basis. So at the time of writing the report, everything was procured with the exception of 2 smaller work packages which related to specialist works, which one was the installation of smoke ventilation to communal areas, particularly in stairwells to our high-rise blocks, and 72 number compartmentation breaches in common areas. Both of those are in procurement and due to conclude in mid-November, with supplier appointment expected in late November. In both cases, although the procurement's underway, we don't expect those procurements and the completion of those works to delay overall completion of the project, which is due to complete by the 18th of March 2022. So the total work actions in that package of work were 900. At the time of writing the report, we completed 124 actions. Chair, I'll pause at that point if there are any questions.
I think there are some questions, yeah. But I'd just like a clarification, please, before I open it up to questions. You're saying about 83% of all actions are fire door replacements, and you've got total work actions of 901, and your actions complete 124. Are you talking just about the high-rise actions?
Yes,
just the high-rise actions?
Just the high-rise, yes.
So this is not compliance across all buildings with communal areas for fire doors. This is just the high-rise, and so the 901 total actions, are those just high-rise actions?
Just the high-rise, yeah.
Just high-rise actions. Yeah. Okay.
But they're not high priority. Can I just add, Councillor Smays, that they're not high priority actions? They're all medium and low priority actions.
Right. Okay. Okay. So at this moment in time, these actions that you're talking about delivering on are for the high-rise only.
Yes.
The larger project as well has all properties in with communal areas. Yes.
It does. Low-rise blocks. Yes.
Yes, and that is a longer term.
Yeah. So if I may, I'll just update the panel on where we are. So we've packaged all that work up. So that is everything other than the high rise and our high priority actions, and we packaged that up into a contract across around 800 blocks across the district, and that has been packaged and been tendered. We've received the tenders back last week. We've received 6 returns from contractors, and we're going to go into evaluation next week. We've got 3 days of evaluation next week, after which point we expect to appoint a contractor, providing that the technical checks and each tender or the winning tender is compliant. We don't yet know what the contractor's capacity is. That's part of the evaluation checks to see, well, what is their capacity and what are their proposals. But there is a specific question in the tender to see what the most effective and efficient way of delivering that work is, and they'll be scored accordingly. But again, it's got to be realistic as well, and they've got to demonstrate that they've got the adequate resource to deliver so. At this stage, I can't say whether it's a 12-month or an 18-month or a 24-month project. It depends on the evaluations and the contractors' proposals. We do expect to be into contract on the site, on works in progress from April 22.
Okay, thank you.
So, Chair, if I could
yeah.
just add to that. So once we've got the contractors' proposals, we'll be able to firm up a programme and enable the panel and, of course, others to see the kind of the incremental approach to delivery, so that it's not a, we'll finish in 2024, but just hold your breath until then.
Yeah.
It will have milestones in place across that 2-year or whatever the programme period is to enable us to track progress and
right.
assure ourselves that we are tracking to where we need to track to.
Okay, all right, Kevin.
Thanks, Chair. Asad, you outlined in your report that 70 assets, communal areas appear to have been discovered. Can you clarify if we reached statutory requirements in relation to that?
Sorry, in each case, Kevin, those assets have already been identified as under compliance programme. They just hadn't been assigned as a communal asset. So, for example, some were car parks, some were parking spaces, but where there were boilers, for example, and boiler houses, there were already in existing compliance programmes. They just hadn't been assigned as a communal asset.
No, because you've not breached any statutory requirements.
No,
it's just within the hierarchy.
It's assigning them, yes. Yeah. Okay, so it's in the data definitions that they weren't assigned as a communal asset. So therefore, when we were reconciling our asset lists, they weren't showing up, even though they were in programme in terms of inspection and maintenance programmes.
That's fine. I think the wider programme on fire safety, when you've got a contractor, will be welcomed. I noted on 205, you said that tenders had not achieved the requisite numbers of returns to satisfy procurement. It's a widespread issue, is that, across the sector at the moment, with a lack of availability of contractors and resources. Are you considering it? Have you got any flexibility in these exceptional circumstances to move outside standard procurement if this is impacting on resident safety?
Yeah, so we've had the first round of tender, and we received one tender that wasn't compliant, but it breached the financial procedure thresholds as well. So we have to give it a second round. If after this second round we receive the same response, we'll have to take a view on it, Kevin, I dare say, because it's that balance of breaching the CPRs and FPRs and not doing the work.
Absolutely, yeah, and I'd share the same. Procurement's got a really valuable role to play in terms of ensuring that. I've never had such exceptional circumstances as this with the sort of contractor market at the minute. But thanks for that. And just finally from me, I suppose Linda talked earlier around reassuring. This looks really reassuring in terms of 51% completion against the plan. I was just wondering, in terms of those ones that are completed, are they signed off independently, say by Eric or by internal audit? And just finally, it's not referenced any sort of timescales or programme for completion of the rest. Are we happy? Is there any visibility on the timescale and completion in terms of that programme?
So I'll take the first point, Kevin, that we do have a formal process of completion and sign off. We have a statutory pro forma that each lead officer needs to complete and submit to the independent consultant. Within that, there's got to be evidence that that action's been satisfactorily signed off with an annex document if that's what's required, and then that will go to our sponsor for approval, and then it will go to the Building Safety Assurance Board for sign off. In terms of, sorry, what was the second question again?
It was just visibility on the programme and if you received the plan.
So the programme is on programme. The actions that sit probably the furthest away are the low-rise package, but until we've got that procured and we've got the contractor's proposal, we can't therefore say, well, actually the date that we put in the recommendations, which was 2023, is going to be achievable. So those, in my view, are the ones that are at risk, most at risk. Everything else is within our gift, if you like, but it's those actions that relate to FRAs, medium and low actions to low-rise blocks, that potentially could extend.
That is the visibility though in each of these audit actions.
Yes.
There is a target date.
There's a target date.
You're not just
yes.
moving those to suit workload or what's happening. It's like a fixed target date. And if
So we use. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, if exceptional circumstances arise, it's understandable that sometimes you go overdue. I'm not holding you to it. I'm just asking if there is that sort of fixed visibility on that on the deadline.
So we use what's known as a smart sheet that's managed by Anthony Brown. So any changes, any audited changes are reconciled and identified through there. If we do push a date on, it's with the agreement of the working group, and it's through the agreement of our consultant. When those dates were applied, they were applied with the knowledge in hand, but we've since discovered in some cases there are dependencies to completion of some of those actions, in which case we have had a reasonable conversation and said, actually, we can't do that till we've done that, and we can't do that because there's a dependency here. So we have shifted some dates, but it's been in agreement with the consultant based on evidence that there is a dependency elsewhere that's preventing us from completing that. But it's not on a wider scale. It's by exception. But those are recorded within the smart sheet.
But now that those dependencies have been identified, we now have fixed dates, and I don't expect those to move.
Okay, all right, Linda.
Thank you, Chair. I struggled a bit to understand this report, not so much the specifics about the details, but just the numbers about progress, really. So can I just check a couple of things with you just to make sure I've got it? And if it's only me, I'll then back
Yeah, of course. Yep.
But there's a reference throughout the document to the original review. Is that the same as the Mazars review?
Yep. So Linda, the original review identified 48 recommendations, and then we added to that the Mazars historical recommendations, which were 13. So 48 recommendations were identified by Anthony Brown, to which we added 13 historical recommendations that come from previous audits.
So which one is the original review, Asad? Just is it Mazars or is it?
It's Anthony Brown's review. Right. So it's a compliance review.
So the compliance review is the same as the original review?
Yes, it is. Yes.
And that has 55 recommendations? No.
55 actions resulting from 48 recommendations, which result in 55 actions. So there may be 2 actions to 1 recommendation. It's the way that it's been laid out. So we've got recommendations in the report, but then they translate to an action.
Yeah, I'm just trying to reconcile the recommendation number before. I completely
48
get
recommendations.
The recommendation can lead to more than 1 action. I get that. But just in terms of the recommendation.
So, if I can clarify, 48 recommendations from Anthony Brown, sorry, and then we have 13 outstanding actions from the Mazars audit, so 61 actions in total. Sorry, 61 recommendations in total, but results in more actions.
Yeah, okay. And then paragraph 2.03 of your report says in August, the Assurance Board wanted to focus on the original review and the original 55 recommendations, but you haven't mentioned 55. What are they?
Sorry, Linda, that should say actions. That should say 55 actions. So 48 recommendations resulting in 55 actions.
Oh, right. Okay.
That's my fault. Yeah, that should say actions.
Right. And why does the programme dashboard at paragraph 2.03 have different numbers in than the programme dashboard at 2.04?
Because at that point we removed all of those additional actions that we were reporting on. So any sub-actions. So it's detailed in 2.0.3 that the Assurance Board, when we were reporting to the Assurance Board, included the original review recommendations, actions, sub-actions, and the regulator actions and historical actions from the Mazars audit. So we put everything in one place because we wanted to report on everything in one place. But the Assurance Board said that that's distorting progress against the compliance review. So can you remove those actions, which gave us the table and the current table at 2.0.4. which details just the original recommendations or those actions relating to the compliance review and the Mazars audit. But we are still monitoring the FRA actions, which was one of the items that we added to the compliance review.
So, Linda, if I could just clarify that, because I can see that you're still confused. The first dashboard refers to the global actions that we have. So regulator actions, Mazars actions, and Anthony Brown actions.
Yes.
So that's why progress looks like a lower percentage, because we have a higher volume to go against. 2.04, the second dashboard, reports purely on the 48 recommendations that Anthony Brown made to us, where we have progressed to 51% actions completed.
Right. So the assurance board is looking only at the Anthony Brown recommendations, and is that right?
No, it's looking at everything, Linda. So we report everything to the assurance board across our compliance scorecard. So we present our update against the FRA programme in terms of remedial actions and where we are against those remedial actions, but we don't present it in this format. We split them out. So we have a scorecard, the compliance scorecard, which shows progress against our inspection programs, and then we present the new table at 2.0.4 just to talk about the compliance review and the progress against the compliance review. So they're cited on everything. It's just that we've split them out, whereas before we'd included them all in the table that captures the compliance review. But because that was distorting progress, we split them back out in August.
Right. I'm not 100% sure I've got that, but I'll take it away and think about it. Thank you. Can I just ask one other question, though? Whichever dashboard we look at, how do I understand the relative risk of the uncompleted items?
We have a priority assigned to every single action. So I can bring that information back to a follow-up meeting, Linda, to identify, to kind of stipulate which actions are outstanding and the priority against those actions and a completion date.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so do you have that risk in view on your compliance programme dashboard at
Yes.
all? Because the answer to the question about the assurance board thought that taking out the FRA actions distorted the compliance review actions. So are they being run as one, or are they being run separately? I think this is where we're a little bit confused, Linda. Is that overarching view of where you are with all these actions? Because you will only have so much percentage of actions that you've completed at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So it's that overarching view I think we're a bit confused about.
Yeah, so I think the bit that's missing here, Chair, if I may, is the scorecard, the compliance scorecard. So that details our performance against compliance, both on inspection and the remediation and remedial actions for both fire safety and asbestos. Whereas previously we were bringing the compliance review, including all those actions. We've now split that out, but it's still cited and reported to Building Safety Assurance Board on a monthly basis, and those same actions, both fire safety actions, are reported to the senior management team on a weekly basis. So they're completely in sight. All we've done is we split them off from the dashboard that you see at 2.0.4. which was produced by Anthony Brown, which was purely designed to report on the compliance review. But what we did is we started to add other actions to that, so we had them all in one place.
Okay, all right. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to focus in on 2.05 again, if we may, and just dive into a few of the figures there, because we've got 901 actions outstanding, 83% of which are related to fire doors, which in my basic maths equates to about 750 fire doors. I'm assuming that's about right. Yeah. But what that doesn't tell me is what actions what those actions completed are they all in relation to fire doors, or is there a split between work? Again, how does that translate into risk? Are these all high risk items, or what are we?
So we don't have any high risk items, Councillor Smith, to our high rise blocks. They're all medium and low risk actions, and they are the completions do represent fire doors and other completions. So there may be repairs in breaches and compartmentation. There may be the installation of smoke detectors to a Part 6 standard. So it's a combination of we have a number of work streams going on that programme. So we're tackling those work streams not individually but collectively. So we're getting completions against different work streams on a weekly basis. So the completions don't just reflect one work stream.
Thank you. And you've already mentioned we've got tender going out for works to the balance of the housing stock. I'm assuming that's fire doors and such again, is it? I've got an
Yes.
idea of the scope of the numbers for fire doors and such for the rest of the housing estate.
Yeah, so we've got not just fire doors. The tenders have been received, so the tenders have been out, and we've got them back, Councillor Smith. So the works across again by block. So by block, it will be compartmentation, fire doors. It will be the full range of works per block. That's how we package them all up, and that's how we intend to deliver them. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but again, I can provide those numbers to you by all means. They are the balance, so all of those actions are medium and low risk actions to low rise blocks. So they're not in scope. Any of those buildings are not in scope, but they are the balance of all of our actions. As I said earlier, we're evaluating next week. We've probably got 3 days of evaluation. We've had 6 returns. So we set aside 3 days to ensure that we evaluate those and we make an appointment, hopefully at the end of that 3-day period. And then we'll get into a pre-contract services agreement period with the contractor up till March, at which point we'll start the work. But we'll develop the programme based on a priority, based on a profile of risk identified through vulnerability in those blocks, because they're all classed as the same risk. So we're going to pick out those blocks in terms of running a priority order based on vulnerability of residents, and also the information that we're pulling together at the moment. We're carrying out person-centred risk assessments, and in some cases pulling together PEEPs as well. So wherever the vulnerability is, those are the blocks that we'll target first.
Thank you. That's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. So the numbers for the rest of the stock you'll let us have.
Yes,
I think we're still unclear about this. Well, I certainly am still unclear about how you're keeping all of this risk in view at any one time. It is a huge undertaking, and it's how this is being kept in view. So the actions and the risk of not doing those, of the completion of those actions or non-completion of those actions for a period of time, while you get contractors, etc., in place. So I don't know about anybody else, but I think, would you like a little bit, some more detailed information on how you're doing that? Yes, yeah, I'm seeing nods. Yes. I think we'd like to explore that in more detail, actually. And I'd also like to ask about resourcing, because at the moment you're dealing with contracts for, as we said in the communications, you're dealing with contracts for a set number of housing blocks, and then you're going to be moving on to contracts for the rest of the stock, etc. Where are you with resourcing and being able to keep on top of all of this within the teams that you have?
So, Councillor Smage, we are in the process of recruiting. We're launching our substantive recruitment campaign for 27 new posts in the building safety structure in December. But in the meantime, we are recruiting to temporary posts where we've identified a need for project management and technical function as well. So we have appointed clerk of works, we've appointed technical officer, we've appointed a fire safety lead, all on a fixed term basis while we launch the substantive recruitment campaign. We're recruiting building safety managers at the same time as well, but that's all within the 27 additional posts within the building safety team. Again, we're receiving some challenge, a lot of competition in the marketplace. So we do have a graduate and apprenticeship programme, a cohort within that new safety structure as well, because we see that that's our potential route to being able to overcome some of the challenges, to recruit some of the specialist skills that we need. We've identified a workforce development plan for the existing team as well. So we've identified in accordance with the regulators' expectation of vocationally recognised qualifications. That's now been bedded in. So we're now working with our OD team to upskill existing teams and also ensure that anybody coming into the team meets that minimum standard as well. So that will be rolled out over 12 to 18 months as well. So the recruitment campaign's underway, the workforce development assessment's been carried out, and the level of competency and skill has been identified, and that's now been put into a delivery programme.
Okay. Councillor Smith, you wanted to come in on this, I think.
Yeah, thank you. Kind of just going back to the point of the broad works again, but I realise you're not going to have answers to this question until you've got all the until you've narrowed down the tenders. But I'm just wondering, in broad strokes, what are the timeframes that we're looking at from the feedback you've got from the contractors in terms of estimated completion of the works, in terms of months or years, and how does that align with the council's ambitions for getting this work done?
So we haven't evaluated the tenders, Councillor Smith, yet. We've done the technical checks to ensure that the bids are compliant financially and that the contracts have submitted in accordance with our pricing templates. So the evaluation starts in earnest on Tuesday and goes through to Thursday. Those are the questions that we've set within the quality submission, and those are the questions that we expect contractors to have responded to, but we'll evaluate them on their proposals during Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday. So unfortunately, I can't give you any idea yet because we haven't physically opened the tenders because we have to do it through a panel.
So if I could answer the final bit of your question in terms of the ambition of the council to get tenant safe, it's quite clearly as quickly as possible. But that isn't going to work with contractors unless they have the capacity. So if we said 6 months, we want you to complete all these actions, they'd probably say never in a million years. So we have to work with them to get a program that is deliverable and achievable, and that we can continue to work with them rather than constantly be in conflict.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any more questions or points that want to be raised? No? Okay, can I thank everybody this morning for being part of the meeting? We will be looking at the agenda plan and we're going forward, and we will have discussions about that going forward. The next formal meeting is in December, and there is an informal meeting at the end of November. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.